Um, Thank you for inviting me here on the Porto Academy. I feel truly honored to be here in this beautiful hot session in Porto. And I would like you to join me to Holland. We've been there already just shortly, briefly in the lecture before. But this is our office. It's located in Rotterdam, in one of the oldest parts of Rotterdam. We're up left, where you see the flagpole, and have the ambition to raise the flag one day. I would first like to tell you a couple of autobiographical things, because I will be using the word we, and that means that I'm not alone. We started our office together with Sandor Naus. That's my partner, and he's not here. He's on holidays in France. So I have to do the dirty job. Now, I'd like to tell a bit about us, where we're coming from. And that actually starts with our education. We were both trained on an Academy of Fine Arts, and there we were taught to paint and to build models and to build installations before we got interested in becoming an architect. And that only happened later. And then we followed our studies for a master degree in architecture. We both went to Flanders to work in Antwerp, because we saw ourselves surrounded by architects that were not thinking about the making, but were thinking about only conceptual things in the Netherlands at that time during the 90s. And we did not really we could not really relate to that. So therefore, we escaped to Flanders, where everything was better at that time, at least, and still is, I think. After 2 years, we both returned, and then Sander started working at MVRDV, and then I started working at Rapp & Rapp. Now, Rapp & Rapp, that's the office of Christian Rapp, and he's a pupil of Hans Koolhof. MVRDV is one of the most notorious offsprings of OMA, and I think that tells something about our office. Because it means two completely different perspectives in architecture, and about thinking of architecture. And this is not really a dedication to these offices, but I think spending 4 or 6 years there, of course, heavily influenced our thinking of architecture. And we also think it's necessary to tell this, because to show actually your influences, because it's a way of building up an architectural vocabulary which is embedded in a wider understanding, so or a longer line. And of course, for us, this brings a very fragile balance between two different directions, both being married in one office. Now, something completely different. I have let's say, I have a ritual that I always use when I give lectures, and that is to tell you about Monadnock, why we gave ourselves, or why we have chosen the name Monadnock, and that's because of a building in Chicago. And when we first saw this building, we were completely stunned, and we fell in love with this building. Later we found out that this building got his name from a type of mountain, geological process of erosion, where the soft ground gets spoiled away, and then the hard rock remains there. And it's quite a nice comparison with the building, the Monadnock building. But what truly intrigues us in this building is one part was built by, or designed and built by Burnham and Root, and the other part was built by Holabird and Roche. Holabird and Roche took about 2 years to design and construct, and the part of Burnham and Root took about 10 years. So you have we are now in, let's say, 1892. And what intrigues me, and I'm already going to disclose this, if we ask or if we discuss with people about what intrigues us so much about the building, and we ask them which part is the youngest and which part is the oldest, they always mix them up. So this part is actually the oldest part, and this one is the youngest part. And it has to do with the perception of what is old and new. So the oldest part is much more reduced, while the youngest part is richly decorated. It has a steel facade, a complete steel structure, more open windows. But the older part has almost no ornamentation. All the ornamentation comes from the shape itself, from let's say something like this, the plinth, which is like a big belly sticking out. And if you look at the Orioles here, they are super plastic. They have a plasticity with special bricks going bending into 2 dimensions. The depth of the windows, all these things give it expression, as very special expression. Now, this we are also more in love with this part of the building, by the way, than the newest part. And look, and then I have to stop talking about this building, because I always tend to give a lecture about this building instead of our own work. But look what happens here. Over 16 floors, in the plinth we have a very sharp angle, and then it gradually goes all the way up and gets rounded. Now, that's quite special, and that's of course also a type of decoration, but it comes from a complete different understanding. And but it's actually the idea of embracing the past and embracing contemporary architecture, and trying to obtain a product which actually does not engage with one of them, but simultaneously engages with both. And that's what we try to obtain in our buildings. This quote, "Make no little plans," is of one of the architects of the Monadnock building, Daniel Burnham, which later became a very big urbanist and made several plans in the United States. And one of his quotes was, "Make no little plans." And for us it stands for something that stands for an ambition that we fully embrace. And also it also for us makes clear that if you feel attracted to such a thing, then everything you do becomes part of the world of ideas. And that means that we make drawings, we make buildings, we make interiors, we write, we educate, we publish things, and everything is part of one world of things. I'm an editor of the magazine Oase, journal for architecture. We collaborate in making a book. We recently made this publication on the building of Koolhof in Amsterdam. We make drawings where these drawings are actually test cases. They learn us things that we later use in our designs. We make collages of existing buildings and bring them together. We also are invited to take part in exhibitions, and then we deliver things that we are not immediately capable of explaining, not because they come intuitive, but sometimes you have a world of fascinations that you want to test and to try. They are buildings or they are objects. Actually, they are this big. And we try these things without immediately knowing what they mean. And later, we actually recycle these things and change the scale and use them for an exhibition, which is about the surface of things in the new institute in Rotterdam. And this exhibition then contains actually the same formal exercise, as you could say, or explorations we've first found. And then they become actually, then they get more meaning because we have to rethink them and we have to formulate why we use them, and we take them along and develop them further. Another aspect is we were actually trained to think about things that surround us for a very long time, that stay with us. But we were also invited to make installations that would only be there for a month or would only be there for 10 days. And we were a bit hesitative about committing to such projects because we thought this is not real architecture. And then we did a couple of these things because we were curious. And then we found out that this is actually an excellent way to think about architecture because you can test things in public space. So this is an installation for a festival. We call this a small mini city. And we test the proximity of things. It's a small city with alleys, and in these alleys people gather during the festival, and there are different kinds of intimities. This is a large wall that we folded, or it's for another edition of this festival. And then you see that this central space in the city of Utrecht in the Netherlands is one of the let's say most public open squares, and we divide this square into several rooms. And during the festival, people started actually destroying it, so writing on it, but that's part of it because it was only there for 10 days. And this was another thing. This was the first edition. It's almost as high as the church which is next to it. So this condition of temporarity, only being there for 10 days, allows you to be very brutal, to be very without compromise, and to experiment. And we started to love that. And therefore, ever since then, we try to obtain this quality or this condition within our practice simultaneously. So think about long things and think about short things. Now, one of the first commissions that we got is a pavilion for the beach in the city of Rotterdam. It's a pavilion on the River Maas. And this is the pavilion. It's next to the bridge along the river. And everybody knows these city beaches. You can find them in every capital, I think in Paris and in Berlin. They are for the city dwellers that want to go to the beach but don't like to travel that far. So this is actually the condition of that part of the city. And I am always very intrigued by this because it's actually only a very thin layer of sand and a fence surrounding this thin layer of sand that makes people behave completely differently within the city. They wear bikinis and swimming suits while they're still in the city. For us, it was very important to make a pavilion which would have a face towards the city and have a completely different face towards the beach itself. So to the city, it needed to be big scale and brutal and part of the aggression of the city, while on the beach it needed to be intimate and small and delicate. It's also a temporary pavilion, so it's only there for 4 months during the summer, and then it gets detached and sent away to the storage. It was built up twice, and so we have a large billboard facing the city. Strand means beach, So it makes clear what's behind the pavilion, and it's the entrance gate to the beach. So we looked at typologies like this of a gatehouse. That was also in the brief. Make an entrance to the beach, which makes it clear that the beach is there. But we were also completely intrigued by these pictures of Baroness Abbott of New York, where you see these wild publicity signs actually completely taking over buildings, or influencing them at least, and the paintings of publicity signs on buildings. So for us it was, or here, yeah, here's really taking over. It's like twice as big, or here. Beautiful. So we made a, you could say, we had a lot of discussions with our client, because he actually wanted to put Coca-Cola and all kinds of other publicity signs on this billboard. And for us it's a parody on a billboard. It would lose its architectural intentions if it would be a real billboard explaining something else than the thing that's behind it. So what happens, there's a gate, you pass the gate, and then you will find a bar with a balcony. You can go left or right. There's a dance floor here, and then you walk straight ahead towards the balcony, where there's a porch looking over the river. Everything is made of wood. And it's, like I said before, it has two faces, the Janus head. This is the other face. This is a smaller, intimate, more exotic face of the building. And here it contains a kitchen and a second bar. And as you can see, it's one big mess on this beach. So for us, that was also a reason to make a very simple beach pavilion, which could only handle and contain one message saying beach. This is the plan. Very simple plan. And the section, as you can see, it has a large square, you could say, with stairs in front, because there were stairs here and we could not build on these stairs on the pavement. We also were influenced by this book of Stephen Hall, Rural Housing Types, where he shows typologies like a house which is completely surrounded by a porch, or a dog trot house. And we used elements that we actually reorganized in such a way to build up this very simple pavilion. And it's, like I said, it got rebuilt twice, and then they used it for the third time on a flower festival, and I think it got lost now somewhere on the camp terrain. We actually do not know where it is anymore. That's also that's also what happens when temporary buildings. Of course, at a certain moment, just like children, you have to let them go. Now, this is what happens in the cityscape. Now, the second project that I would like to show, and that's the second out of 4, that's Royal Tegelaar factory. That's the oldest building, the oldest, one of the oldest companies in the Netherlands, and it's a ceramics factory, and it actually contains 2 acts. The first act, that's you could say the restoration and extension of a factory hall where the production was taking place. It's a very small village in the northeast of the Netherlands. This was the existing factory hall, and the client came to us with the question, I'm actually doing this building process now, and I want to engage more with architects. I make beautiful ceramics for architects, and now I'm extending my own factory hall. I'm already in the middle of the process, and I'm not taking care of architecture. Please help. So then, with the limited amounts of means that were available, we thought, what is now the typical character of a factory? That's of course the sheds, and then we tried to make a family of sheds because we had of course to anticipate to the existing structure with their own rhythm, and by just pulling up these roof lights you would actually get quite a characteristic silhouette. And this is what it is, containing two colors. You have to imagine that this ceramics factory gets its clay, and that is dirty brown clay, like you see in the plinth. These are bricks. They are stored on the terrain. They go into the ovens with a shovel, and then they get baked in the oven, and then they become orange. And that's what the roof is, color is about. Now, it's a very simple utilitarian building. Perhaps there's not even a lot of architecture about it. As you can see, the interior, it's for production. It's hard, it's dirty, and it's also noisy. There's only one room that's like the most precious room where all the architects want to go, because that's where they that's where they have all their samples stored. And during the years, they noticed that the architects visiting this room were so enthusiastic that I thought, well, perhaps we should invite everybody into this production facility instead of our offices, which were a bit further away. Because these offices, that's the second act, they were housed in this beautiful old complex of original, authentic houses, and they thought, well, let's bring everything together, and that meant a completely new question. It meant that this art environment would suddenly also have a representative character. Now, and that led to something that we liked a lot. We actually had to make an illusion, and we thought of this tent room that Schinkel made in Schloss Charlottenburg, and the beauty of this is that it's covering the walls and the ceiling with one textile, and that it actually makes you forget that you're in a house. This illusion of making a tent attracted us, and we thought, well, perhaps that's the best way to change that atmosphere of these offices that needed to be housed there. So the first thing we did was making a big monumental stair on the outside, and then we proposed to make a roof out of tents. As you can see here, the geometry of the existing shed is of course still there. And the nice thing about these tents is that they actually divide the light in a very elegant way. So here you can see the tents again. And it's quite a simple plan. You enter here, and then you have an open office floor and separate meeting rooms. And the stair is actually hanging on the door and standing on 2 points, containing the same colors that we used before. And we made models to test the heights of the tents, and this is the result. Now, the nice thing of these tents is that, like I said, they divide the light, but they also make you forget everything that is behind it. So all the steel, all the pipes, all the ventilation, the lamps, all the things that we were not so sure of, because they were actually belonging to this other world of utilitarian things. All was covered, and the textile of the tent actually allows you to ventilate right through. And then we also were invited to think about the cabinets. So we designed the tables and the cabinets as well. And the cabinets are covered with felt, and as you can see, it's a very transparent. It's a very transparent setting. You can look all the way through to the factory, and here you can see the felt-cladded cabinets, and they actually help for acoustics, just like the floor. Now, these cabinets were designed when we were looking heavily at an all-time hero of us, and that's Joseph Frank. We were completely fascinated by putting up this large block on these high legs. And Joseph Frank also had quite a long theory about these cabinets, that they should be on legs, otherwise they would be too massive and they would be killing the space. So that's something that we completely liked and followed. Now, a third project that I would like to elaborate on, that's a more recent project. This project divides the world in lovers and haters. We have experienced people completely hate this project or immediately understand what we were after. Now, I start this story with again a bit how the process took place. We were invited to take part in a competition for restructuring of a small village in the south east of the Netherlands. That's here. This village called Nieuw Bergen. And it's here located along the river. And the thing with this village is that it's near a very nice big national park, Maasduinen, and close to the German border. And there's a provincial road here. And on one side of the provincial road is Nieuw Bergen, and on the other side of the provincial road there's Bergen. Bergen is the old original village, and the first big extension of this village, called Nieuw Bergen, from the 60s, is on the other side. Now, we were invited to do a restructuring of Nieuw Bergen. And Nieuw Bergen is, has no, you could say, authentic soul like these old villages have. So it's quite a car-dominated environment. And when we went there, we turned depressed because the whole village square was actually containing a parking with a nice, clear, modernist layout, as you can see here, with shops around it and the town hall here. This is the town hall. And the only question that they raised was, could you make us a landmark? And there was not a real clear function for this building, only be visible on the horizon. Now that's quite an ambition, and because there were reasons to be visible on the horizon, because this natural park, like I told you before, attracts a lot of German tourists, and we started to investigate what a high viewpoint or landmark could be. Then the first thing we start doing is collecting examples, local examples, because there's a large tradition of coal mining there, and also examples that are more exotic from abroad. And it actually triggers all kinds of questions, whether it should be a building consisting out of one piece, one shape, or a combination of different elements stacked on top of each other. And gradually it became clear that we had to be simple, making, of course, loads of models first before we could make such a decision. And we won the competition with this entry, which is a very tiny house with a large chimney. And the chimney contains the carousel, the clocks that were standing on the parking place. And it's a bit similar with what Ollie and Thomas just told. Everybody was happy. We were happy. The client was happy. The municipality was happy. There was only one person that was not happy, and that was the urbanist. He said, I want a big tower. And the project developer said, well, a big tower means apartments, and in this small village where everybody lives in a house with a garden, I cannot sell apartments. And the urbanist said, I want a tower. And then the project developer, the client, called us and said, architect, if you don't want to lose your commission, you have to solve this. Because otherwise we're not getting there. So we had to completely rethink our contribution, our winning proposal. And I'm very happy with that, because I find the longer I look at this, quite a boring design. So what we did, we had to rethink about what we were actually doing there in this small village square, because it needs to be a landmark, and all the small villages surrounding it, this village, have their own market square and church tower, but this village is too new to have a church tower. So we had to think about and define the typology of what this new building could be, because what is a landmark? And then we found this tradition of trade buildings on every market square in the Netherlands, and I think also in Flanders, and perhaps also in other places, I think also in Germany. And these trade buildings, they are quite specific. They have a beautiful proportion of being too narrow and too high. They are richly cladded with all kinds of beautiful decorations, most of the time also very un-Dutch material like natural stone, limestone. They most of the time are freestanding, and they contain quite a specific interior organization of a very high ground floor, where the weighting of the goods took place, and then one room upstairs where the people were counting money, let's say the administration. Now that helped us a lot to say, hey, perhaps our building is more like this typology. And then we made a second proposal where we said we make a house which is, let's say, more vertical, that has more monumentality, that wants to be bigger, but yet tangible, touchable, and understandable as part of the scale, of the village. And on top of that, we stack 2 towers, and these towers, they need to be visible from far away, so it's allowed to make them abstract and to give them another language. The local or traditional material in this area is brick, and there used to be a lot of small brick factories, and the request from the client was also to use a local brick. But we found out that all these local companies were actually taken over by a large German brick company, so we felt free to choose from also German bricks. And then we actually decided that it should be part of this, you could say, area of brick buildings, but it should also contain its status apart. Now, this is the figure of the tower, where you can see that it's a square with 2 towers on top. We saw this image and thought, now imagine that you enter this lower house, and you are being welcomed by a bar owner, and the bar owner tells you you can go up, so you can control who's going up and down, and then you go up, and you want to go all the way up, then you actually are not experiencing any climax or any building up of a vertical narrative. So what we liked very much was to make a second level. So you go actually up in the small tower, then you're on a big balcony looking over the market square, and then you go into the second tower, climb up the second tower, and then there's the climax of looking over the landscape. And here you see the diagram again. Now, in between, we were studying, just like we did before, we were studying examples of stacking, and this is one that intrigues me completely. It's a church building by Adler and Sullivan, and if you're not thinking of what is happening on top, but only think of this plinth that wants to be a very large skyscraper, I think. But on top there's a small house has landed, a small wooden house has landed, and that's a beautiful combination, I think, because it challenges the weight of the plinth, and it makes the wooden building also more eloquent and perhaps even more refined. Now, but this contrast of stacking things on top of each other was for us a kind of revelation that could be done in such a brutal way. So we did the same. We stacked two towers with a different language. Now the color is homogenizing them again. And then we did something else. We chose, and that's a correction of what I said before, we chose a red brick, but we started painting with the brick. And we did something we were told never to do. Because you have to be honest with bricks, that's what we learned, but we are being very dishonest here. And the bricks are being put in a piece or in a bucket of green slurry or cement. And that means that one long side of the brick is covered and one short side of the brick is covered with green slurry. And that's a red brick. So sometimes we reveal the red brick, we show it, and in other parts it's just covered with this green cement. And this cement and this color sometimes when it's dry becomes almost almost fluorish green, and when it rains it becomes a bit more grayish. So that's it's really alive, and that's something we really like. And then we used all kinds of local patterns that we found in the surroundings. So patterns like this, the diagonals, things to actually give the windows more character, like a lintel. And we also added plasticity to the facade. This is not necessary because it's in situ concrete, which is a bit unusual in the Netherlands. You would build a building like this out of blocks of chalk, stone, limestone, and but the engineer actually wanted to make diagonal crosses because he was very afraid that the tower would generate too much wind force. And of course the architect said no diagonals in front of the windows, so the only choice was then to make it completely out of concrete. And the concrete is just flat, but we thought this grid is very important to keep everything together. Because you have to imagine that this building is freestanding, so we cannot afford to have a dirty side on the building. Every part needs to have a face that is working. You can see. So we made a grid that goes all around the building, while the windows are actually telling different stories and making different masks, you could say. So here the windows on the first floor are combined, and here they are separated. And this is the plan. And in the plan you can see we did a lot of efforts to push all the stuff into one corner to make an L-shaped free space where you could have a bar. This is the ground level. Everything is visible from all sides. There's always a connection to what is happening on the square and the street. And then on the first floor, there are toilets and a kitchen. It's a bit more complicated. There's even a floor in between, as you can see here, which contains toilets. So you go up here, you step over, and then you reach the highest point here. Now the windows, they have a very, let's say, we wanted to be this to be a building that is joyful. So we thought, let's provide for window frames that are very not only flat but also which makes them very graphical, but also give them a bright color. So they're gold and anodized window frames. And this is what we did with the patterns. So these are all local patterns that we found. You could say this is the only very exotic one, which we call a Brazilian bond with open bricks, which allows the wind to pass through. And what we did was making all kinds of very subtle changes when you would go around the corner. So as you can see here, the pattern switches from red into green. And we started to maintain continuity by making blind windows here. And as the arch disappears, we actually wanted to keep the rhythm of the arch, and therefore we made decorated surfaces. And this is how it appears. And people first thought it, the first reaction of the inhabitants of the village was that it is a mosque. And we were very surprised by that, because we did all these efforts for putting in so many local motifs. And gradually they started appreciating it, also thanks to you architects, because they get a lot of visitors that are architects in the village now. And here you can see again the flipping of the pattern going from green to right or red. And this is what you can see when you go all the way to the top. And you can see the church towers here of the surrounding villages. And this is what the tower looked like during the construction. You can see that the tower is not massive at all. For us it's also a kind of billboard actually, because it's a steel construction which is covered with just one layer of bricks attached to this steel structure, and it has only you could say it's a sign, and it has no more use than, yeah, of course you can climb up, but it does not have any more intention than being a sign. So the inside is raw and unpolished, and we like that. We also asked the bricklayers to not clean this, so you have these beards of cement hanging down. Well, yeah, I will. Yeah, here you can see that the grid is actually just hollow, being placed in front, and of course, as we are trained in thinking in brick, we encountered all kinds of problems. So you have a kind of lintel here. How do you pull the lintel around the corner? And then we look at one of our favorite architects, Giovanni Muzio in Milan, how he pulls a lintel around the corner, but he's actually playing a bit false tricks, which is also good, of course, but in the Dutch climate that's really a bit harder, because there's only one brick here in the end, and in the Netherlands that would freeze off, so we had to come up with other solutions. And by now the inhabitants actually feel quite comfortable with it. And we hope that it turns beautifully old, like a ruin that we found in the village of Bergen on the other side of the provincial road. On the cemetery, there's an old church tower containing all kinds of beautiful brick bonds, which we did not see during our design. The last project, that's the Atlas House. That's a recent project that we have built in Eindhoven. That's a city in the south. This is, you have to imagine an old, Eindhoven is an old industrial city where the lighting company of Philips started many years ago. And in this old industrial quarter, they are now transforming that into a living area. And most of these complexes are large housing complexes, but there's always a zone for, let's say, freestanding villas. And this is the old estate. It's almost a park. It's really huge, of the owners of the factory of Philips, of the Philips family, so to say. And it's very green, and you cannot access it. And our clients, a couple of a graphic designer and a psychiatrist, they bought this very tiny piece of land with a very big wish for many square meters and a very tiny budget. So they asked us to make something beautifully big. And we said, okay, now perhaps we can then use simple material which could automatically be also the inside. So we just take one huge insulated brick and stack them on top of each other, and then you have your finishing as well. But before that, we actually asked them, do you want to live around your garden because your plot is rather small, or do you want to live with your garden surrounding you? And we did a couple of tests to make a patio house in which we filled the complete plot. And then they actually chose for what we call a tower house. Now, I've seen the tower houses of Tom, and of course it's a hard comparison, but at the same time, if you look at the proportions, it's narrow and it's high. We decided to, together with the clients, to make a house which is as compact as possible with a very small footprint of 8 by 8 meters, and divide the living over 3 floors with a roof terrace on top. And that's this. And we made this impression in the beginning of the process, because for us it's, well, in the beginning, not in the let's say when we were on 1/3 and it started to become a bit clearer what our intentions were. We make these images because we think they are helpful to kind of pinpoint the ambitions in the plan. So it's not the idea that we make this representation afterwards. No, it's a way for us to do research on how the projects should act. Now, we made a very simple house, and we actually tried to make sure that every side of the building would make its own face, would build up its own mask. And for us it was a very intriguing aspect to think of making something which is accommodating, solid and heavy, and being simultaneously light and open. So what we tried to avoid to gather the windows or to bind the windows together. We tried to push the windows as far as possible to the sides of the house. So the windows are always touching the corner to the maximum, so to say. That was one thing, and the other thing we did was having many discussions with the clients for turning the house around. So the house was in the beginning aligning here the street and the estate here, and at a certain point we have proposed to turn it 45 degrees because we were convinced that looking straight to the woods would give you something like a painting, a beautiful painting of leaves, but it would not give sufficient amount of depth. So by turning it around, the whole diagonal idea of the building would highly increase, and you would be able to look all the way through along the lines of this let's call it a forest, and that would give much more depth and much more air. Now that took us I think half a year, and in the end it worked. The building is actually, like I said before, very simple. The plan is also very simple. We have actually a serving zone and two main rooms that are connected. It's actually a collection of rooms, and of course there's a staircase in the middle, which we call actually also a room, and the plan is repeated over 3 floors. So you would actually assume that it's all a bit the same, and for us the big joy is in the section, because in the section we started to manipulate the heights and give every floor a different, and every room a different identity to move up the floors. And that also means that you on every floor have a different relation to the windows. Sometimes the window is high, sometimes the window is low, sometimes the window offers more privacy, and sometimes it exposes you completely. There are some elements that have not been placed yet, like a balcony here, because this also forces you to rethink and reconsider the whole way of living when you have to divide it over 3 floors. You also have to imagine that this tiny plot of land would soon be surrounded by other houses, other villas, which would then be very close to them. So the garden would not be the most private part of the house anymore. No, the higher you would go up, the more privacy you would get. So in the end, it was actually the roof terrace that would make it possible to be fully naked till this point, and then be, let's say, visible or gain the most privacy, and that's actually the free zone. And you would be between the crowns of the trees and celebrate your house. And you would also do your barbecues, for example. Now, here you can see the idea of bringing in the exterior to the interior. That started with a very direct idea of using one big insulated block, but we soon found out that it was a bit difficult, that it would lead to all kinds of restrictions concerning the building permission. So we separated it into 2 layers, which would still be the same. There are high bricks. I will show it in the next slide. This is what I told you about, and this is what it's like in its surroundings. And these pictures have been taken when the building was just finished. And you can see that it's standing along a nice green lane with beautiful old trees with high and mature crowns. As said before, there will be a balcony here that explains the strange door here. And when you start observing the house from an angle, then you understand positioning of the windows probably much better, because they're actually starting to act as bay windows, helping each other instead of pushing each other away. And the weight is still in the middle, while the corners are much more open. The brick is a double high brick, and for us it was a way to give even more mass to the plinth. And it's one material all the way up, and we wanted to actually, in a very direct way, think of obtaining plasticity and a narrative which is about a classical language of building up a building in a plinth and a top. So what we tried to do, we kind of are like in the landmark building. There you see that we use more layers, like a grid in front, and we try to be more simple, more direct. So what we did was adding a layer of almost the same stuff, cement, slurry, over the paint this over the bricks, which would give the building a more light experience, and would also make the building look almost, give it a kind of textile quality. So instead of making a very heavy brick block, we try to make the top look more ephemeral. And also the joints between the bricks help a bit, I think. And then you have this tradition in the Netherlands in the Neo-Renaissance period, where rich people buying houses in the city or building their houses would like to have very high ceilings and very large rooms, and then not spend so much money on the outside of the building. So the basic material in these buildings has always been brick, and then instead of cladding the brick, they started cladding it with limestone or other expensive stone types. They would actually plaster it or even paint it, and they would use architectural elements like a windowsill or a lintel, or they would make a keystone on top of a window. And that was actually a motive that we followed as well. So we started with these keystones in the bottom, but then these keystones sometimes are not obeying. They actually do play a different game of making a composition. This is what we test on the way down. And for us, it's a very interesting way to think about this. Only adding one layer to a building could give meaning to the building. So that's what the ambition is. Instead of using a lot of materials, we only use this one layer of paint, and with this one layer, we try to tell everything, and that means that we also use this as try to use this as decoration. So by leaving it out in the depth of the windows, you actually see that it's only a small film almost. You can still read the lintels here through the paint. It's also the plasticity of the joints that starts to melt together with the paint. You can also see that the inside has the same rhythm and the same color as the outside, although it's a slightly different brick. And the joints themselves are actually bulbing out. They actually form a layer on itself. And of course, we look at examples like this. So I was telling about this Dutch tradition, but we're also completely intrigued by what Venturi is doing here. He's adding a figure which completely ignores, or partially ignores the actual form of the building. And this is the interior, where you can see that we thought that we would favor our client by saying we use the same material on the inside that makes the house cheaper. And when we were working, it became clear for us that we were completely wrong, because we had to design everything, every corner. Normally you would say, okay, just cover it with paint or something. Nobody will see it. But now we had to be very careful about every landing of a brick. And for us it was very important that these kinds of elements would be there, because they then always show where you go from one room to the other room. And we also have an interior window. This is the kitchen, and this is actually the dining room. And although the floor plan is very restrictive and limited, we try to be generous in the height. So this height is 4 meters. Now that's a nice dining room, I think. And then next to the dining room, there's a more intimate space. And then you can see that it's 2 steps lower. And the client promised us not to paint the interior white. So we had to think of all these things. We also like it that the client, of course, uses his furniture. We don't have good taste when it comes to the interior. We're very happy to see these things happening. They go well along together, I think. And here you can see the working of the 2 windows together, being a bay window. In the end, our client painted the interior grey. Thank you very much.